Dear cadets, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to all of you. I hope you all are fine, safe and sound at your respective houses. I'd like to welcome you to my session. Before going to the main session, I would like to say something about this ongoing corona pandemic. Here, I would like to show you some do's and don'ts. Please wash your hands regularly. Use handkerchief, tissue, or towel while sneezing or coughing. Always wear a mask. And these are the things you should not neglect. If you are sick, please report to concerned person. Do not shake hands and stay away from wild animals. You know me, I am a Bulgaji sir, lecturer in English, Borsham College. While preparing this lesson for you, I consulted these books: Collins Covey English Grammar, Oxford English Grammar, Intermediate English Grammar, and Cambridge Advanced Learners Dictionary. Today we are going to talk about a topic from the unit Writing Theme of Poetry. You see the picture. And today's topic is Writing Theme of Poetry. We will talk about some literary terms. At the end of this lesson, we will be able to describe literary terms, apply literary terms while writing theme of poetry. Our first literary terms is allegory. An allegory is a short story that is used to represent a more general message about real life, historical issues, and or events. It is typically an entire book, novel, or play, etc. So, what does allegory tell? A story that is used to represent a more general message about real life. So, let's have a look at the example. George Orwell's dystopian book Animal Farm is an allegory for the events preceding to the Russian Revolution and the Stalinist era in early 20th century Russia. In the story, animals on a farm practice animalism, which is essentially communism. Many characters correspond to actual historical figures, like Old Major represents both founder of communism Karl Marx and the Russian communist leader Vladimir Lenin. The farmer, Mr. John, is the Russian Tsar. The boar, Napoleon, stands for the Joseph Stalin, and the pig, Snowball, represents Leo Trotsky. So this is how allegory represents a general issue. Alliteration, this is a literary terms, is a series of words or phrases that all start with the same sound. These sounds are typically consonants to give more stress to the syllable. You will often come across alliteration in poetry, titles of books, and poems. Jane Austen is a fan of this device. For example, just look at Pride and Prejudice and the Sense and Sensibility and Tongue Twisters. So alliteration is basically a repetition of the same sound. Example, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. In this tongue twister, the pa sound is repeated at the beginning of all major sounds. So this is alliteration. Allusion, an interesting figure of speech. Allusion is when an author makes an indirect reference to a figure, place, event, or idea originating from outside the text. Many allusions make reference to previous work of literature or art. It will become clear if we see the example. Stop acting so smart. It's not like you were Einstein or something. This is an allusion to the famous real-life theoretical physicist, Albert Einstein. So you make a reference. Anachronism. Anachronism occurs when there is an intentional error in the chronology or timeline of a text. This could be a character who appears in a different time period than when he actually lived, or a technology that appears before it was invented. Anachronisms are often used for comedic effect. Look at the example. A Renaissance king who says that's doctude would be an anachronism, since this type of language is very modern and not actually from the Renaissance. Look at this picture. That person is holding a gun, but he is riding a dinosaur. So it does not go with the chronology of time. So that's why this is anachronism. Anaphora is when a word or phrase is repeated at the beginning of multiple sentences throughout a piece of writing. It is used to emphasize the repeated phrase and evoke strong feelings in the audience. So this is interesting. Anaphora happens when we repeat a word. So, or phrase, look at the example. A famous example of anaphora is Winston Churchill's "We shall fight" on the beaches speech. Throughout this speech, he repeats the phrase "we shall fight," while listing numerous places where the British Army will continue battling during World War II. He did this to really rally both troops and the British people and to give them confidence that they would still win the war. Anthropomorphism. An anthropomorphism occurs when something non-human, such as an animal, place, or inanimate object behaves in a human-like way. So, anthropomorphism is something non-human, such as an animal, place, or inanimate object behaves in human-like way. So you see, this mouse is reading a book. This is not a person, right? But he is like human-like way. Example, children's cartoons may have many examples of anthropomorphism. For example, Mickey and Minnie Mouse can speak, wear clothes, sing, dance, ride cars. Real mice can do any of these things, but the two mouse characters are much more like humans than mice. So look at these Ice Age characters. Colloquialism, this is a much familiar term, is the use of informal language and slang. It is often used by authors to lend a sense of realism to their characters and dialogues. Forms of colloquialism include words, phrases, and contractions that aren't real words, such as gonna, ain't. Example, hey, what's up, man? This piece of dialogue is example of colloquialism since it uses common everyday words and phrases named what's up and man. Epigraph. Epigraph is when an author inserts a famous quotation, poem, song, or other short passage or text at the beginning of a larger text. This is interesting. An epigraph is when an author inserts a famous quotation, poem, song, or other short passage or text at the beginning of a larger text. An epigraph is typically written by a different writer, with the credit given, of course, used as a way to introduce overarching themes or messages in the work. Some pieces of literature, such as Herman Melville's 1851 novel, Moby Dick, incorporate multiple epigraphs throughout. So, while in our day-to-day writing or any other academic writing, we use most of the time as an introductory, we use introductory passage, poetry. This is actually called epigraph. Example, at the beginning of Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises is an epigraph that consists of a quotation from poet Gertrude Stein, which reads, "You are all lost generation," of passage from the Bible. Here, there is one thing. What we do in life echoes in the eternity. That can be an epigraph if you put it at the beginning of any piece of writing. Epistrophe is similar to anaphora, but in this case, the repeated word or phrase appears at the end of successive statements. So anaphora at the beginning, epistrophe at the end. Like anaphora, it is used to evoke an emotional response from the audience. Look at here. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Now, more example. In Lyndon B. Johnson's speech, The American Promise, he repeats the word problem in use of epistrophe. There is no Negro problem, there is no Southern problem, there is no Northern problem, there is only an American problem. You see all the problems at the end of the phrase. That is epistrophe. Euphemism. Euphemism is when a more mild or indirect word or expression is used in place of another word or phrase that is considered hard, blunt, vulgar, or unpleasant. We all should practice euphemism in our day-to-day life. It will reduce many problems. So what actually he wants to say, you are fired, but what he is saying, I'm letting you go. Example, I'm sorry, but he didn't make it. The phrase didn't make it is a more polite and less blunt way of saying that someone has died. So look at this picture also. You can say, you are fired, I've got to go. I've got to let you go. So this soften the blow. That is what this is, euphemism. Flashback. This is a technique you might be familiar with. It's an interruption in a narrative that depicts events that have already occurred, either before the present time or before the time at which the narration takes place. The device is often used to give the reader more background information and details about specific characters, events, plot points, and so on. So this is flashback technique. You recollect something from the past. Most of the novel, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, is a flashback from the point of view of the housekeeper, Neddy Dunn, as she engages in a conversation with a visitor named Lockwood. In this story, Neddy narrates Catherine Earnshaw's and Heathshaw's childhood, the pair's budding romance, and their tragic demise. Flashback is a technique writers use to describe the events that took place earlier. Foreshadowing is when an author indirectly hints at through the things such as dialogue, description, or character section what's to come later on in the story. Kind of prediction. This device is often used to introduce tension to the narrative. Example, say you are reading a fictionalized account of Amelia Earhart before she embarks on her to be fortunate plane ride. A friend says to her, be safe. Wouldn't want you getting lost or worse. This line would be an example of foreshadowing because it implies that something bad will happen to Earhart. Hyperbole is another interesting literary device. Is an exaggerated statement that's not meant to be taken literally by the reader. It is often used for comedic effect or emphasis. You say something bigger, which is actually not true. Look at this example. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Example. The speaker would not literally eat an entire horse and most likely could not, but this hyperbole emphasizes how smart the speaker feels. Imagery. This is the most common literary device found in poetry or any piece of writing. Is when an author describes a scene, theme, or idea so that it appeals to our senses, taste, smell, sight, touch, hearing. The device is often used to help the reader clearly visualize parts of the story by creating a strong mental picture. So there is the example in Bengali, you see, Brishti pore, tapur tupur, node eloban. When you read this line, you visualize what happens. So that is imagery. Here is an example imagery taken from William Wordsworth's famous poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. While you read these lines, the entire events come flashing in front of your eye. That is imagery. It gives you some sort of images, creates images in your vision. Irony, which we use very often, is when a statement is used to express an opposite meaning than the one literally expressed by it. There are three types of irony in literature. You say something, but you mean something different. You see, this boy, he is saying this book is good, but his expression, it's totally opposite. So three types of irony. Verbal irony, when someone says something but means the opposite, similar to sarcasm. Situational irony, when something happens that the opposite of what was expected or intended to happen. Another one, dramatic irony, when the audience is aware of the true intentions or outcomes while the characters are not. As a result, certain actions or events take on different meanings for the audience than they do for the characters involved. One example of verbal irony can be this Edgar Allan's book, The Cask of Amontillado. In the short story, a man named Montresor plans to get revenge on another man named Fortunato. As the toast says, and I, Fortunato, drink to your long life. This statement is ironic because we, the readers, already know by this point that he plans to kill him. Situationally, girls wake up late for school and quickly rushes to get there. As soon as she arrives, though, she realizes that it's Saturday and there is no school. That's situational irony. Dramatic irony. In William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Romeo commits suicide in order to be with Juliet. However, the audience, unlike poor Romeo, knows that Juliet is not actually dead, just asleep. Juxtaposition is the comparing and contrasting of two or more different, usually opposite ideas, characters, objects, etc. This literary device is often used to help create a clearer picture of the characteristics of one object or idea by comparing it with those of another. Example, one of the most famous literary example of juxtaposition is the opening passage from Charles Dickens' novel, A Tale of Two Cities. Let's have a look. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. This is the first best times, and we are talking about Watson. This is juxtaposition. Metaphor or simile. Metaphors are when ideas, actions, or objects are described in non-literal terms. In short, it is when an author compares one thing to another. The two things being described usually share something in common but are unalike in all other aspects. A simile is a type of metaphor in which an object, idea, character is compared to another thing using the words as or like. So you can remember it, direct comparison or indirect comparison this way. Example, what light through yonder window breaks is the east and Juliet is the sun. In this line from Romeo and Juliet, Romeo compares Juliet to the sun, but remember, this comparison is indirect. However, because Romeo does not use the word as or like, it is not a simile, just a metaphor. She is as vicious as a lion. Since the statement uses the word as, or here the comparison is direct, that's why this is a simile. Oxymoron. An oxymoron is a combination of two words that together expresses a contradictory meaning. The device is often used for emphasis, for humor, or create tension to illustrate a paradox. Example, deafening silence, organized chaos, really kind, insanely logical. See, these all are opposite words, but giving to emphasize. Paradox, note that paradox is different from an oxymoron, and a paradox is an entire phrase or sentence, whereas oxymoron is a combination of just two words. Here's a famous paradoxical sentence. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it's not actually false, as suggests. But if it is false, then the statement is true. Thus, this statement is a paradox because it is both true and false at the same time. Personification. Personification is when a non-human figure or thing, abstract concept or element is described as having human-like qualities or characteristics, unlike anthropomorphism, where non-human figures become human-like characters. With personification, the object figure is simply described as being human-like. Personification is used to help the reader create a clearer mental picture of the scene or object being described. Example, the wind moans, beckoning me to come outside. In this example, the wind, a non-human element, is being described as if it was human. Satire is a genre of writing that criticizes something such as a person, behavior, belief, government, or society. Satire often employs irony, humor, and hyperbole to make it its point. The Onion is a satirical newspaper and digital media company. It uses satire to parody common news features such as opinion columns, editorial cartoons, or clickbait headlines. You can say the Alpin, you can or Roshalo for Protomalo. They do this kind of thing. Soliloquy is a type of monologue that often used in dramas. A soliloquy is when a character speaks aloud to himself, thereby revealing his inner thoughts and feelings. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's speech on the balcony that begins with, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo," is a soliloquy as she is speaking aloud to herself. Symbolism refers to the use of an object, figure, event, situation, or other idea in a written work to represent something else, typically a broader message or deeper meaning that differs from its literal meaning. The things used for symbolism are called symbols, and they will often appear multiple times throughout a text, sometimes changing meaning as a plot progresses. Example, in 1925 novel The Great Gatsby, the green light that sits across Gatsby's mansion symbolizes Gatsby's hopes and dreams. Now, the sample question. You see, a poem will be given and you will have to write the theme from that poem. If you have any question, please ask through the comment box. I'll be there to answer your confusion, or you can ask me through Viber. This is your homework. This is also your homework. You try to incorporate these literary terms while writing the theme of this poem. If you can, it will add some extra point and you will get more marks. If you have any question, I repeat, please ask through the comment box. And finally, at the end, I would like all of you to stay home, to stay safe. There is no other precaution you can take. So till then, Allah Hafiz. Thank you all.